go out more. Because if you're on the subway, for example. South Korea has a new president, and his name has become a news topic. Yoon Seo-kyol. Some call his name Yoon Seo-kyol in Korea, while others call him Yoon Sung-nyeol. The debate has become so heated, even the National Institute of the Korean Language had to chime in. So what is the right way to pronounce his name?
So the National Institute of Korean Language officially said that their rules do not apply to individual names. There are rules for standard pronunciation, and if you wanted to apply those to his name, it would be pronounced Seo-kyol. But the president himself said that he prefers to pronounce it Sung-nyeol, and the institute said that that is then, of course, fine because that's his own personal preference.
So there is a rule, according to the National Institute of Korean Language. How serious should we take this rule?
I think that's really up to the individual. If people want to take it seriously, then what that would mean is that you're then in a position of having to tell people how to pronounce their own name. Some people might not be comfortable with that, in which case then you really can't take the rule very seriously. So I think it's up to the individual, really.
His name is not alone in this. So what is the general rule of thumb when it comes to calling Korean names with a 받침?
So it's hard to say because there's not really a rule of thumb because there are a lot of different consonant combinations that can happen in a name. So I think if I have to give one guideline, it would be that when you have a 받침, so a consonant in the syllable final position, the way it's pronounced depends on the consonant, if any, that follows it. And this is, of course, the same for regular words too, not just names. So to take the example of like 국물, so like 국물, which is like broth, which is a combination of the words for soup and water. In that word, you have a K in 받침 position, in syllable final position, and it's followed by an M. And in that situation, then the K changes to eng, so it becomes 국물. But that's just for the combination of K and M.
One of the popular examples I can think of is the very famous subway station Jongno 삼가. So it's written as Jongro, but a lot of people pronounce it as Jongno. So what's happening here?
So that's another good example because that shows you that it's not just the 받침 that can change. So in that example, it's Jongro, and the iung in the 받침 position, that's actually not changing. What's changing is the initial consonant in the following syllable, where ro changes to no.
So some say the Korean language sounds exactly the way it looks. Well, that doesn't seem to be always the case. What do you think of that statement?
So it's not that wrong of a statement. As far as languages go in the world, it is pretty transparent. And there are a lot of these rules in which pronunciations change, but a lot of these rules are totally predictable. And so when you're learning how to read Korean, you're partly learning what these rules are, and then once you see the right conditions, you just apply the rule. Whereas in English, there often are not rules, or they're embedded in the history of the word, and because English words come from so many different languages, it's really not predictable. So Korean is not pronounced exactly how it's written, but it's mostly predictable. So I mostly agree with that statement. But there are still exceptions in Korean too. So there are some cases where in order to know how to pronounce the word, you would need to know, for example, whether it's a compound word or not. That's the case with the rule surrounding the pronunciation of Seo-kyol versus Sung-nyeol. And then there's other cases that are just they seem kind of arbitrary. So, words like 효과, which, should be pronounced 효과, but people will still say 효과, which is acceptable according to the institute. Or a word like 역관, so in 역관 it's pronounced 관, but in 여관 it's pronounced 관. And these are just kind of arbitrary. So there are still exceptions too. But on the whole, it is relatively straightforward.
Any tips for people who are learning the language now?
Well, if you're trying to get a better pronunciation, obviously the best practice is going to be just practice speaking. I think what's difficult is you don't always have opportunities to practice speaking because maybe you don't have Korean friends to speak with. So in that case, I think one thing I would recommend is just maybe reading out loud to yourself. You certainly have opportunities to read Korean, and I think even if you can't speak with someone else, just practicing sounding out the sounds, that still is going to help you, and just listening to your own pronunciation, that would certainly have a positive effect. So that's one thing that people could do.